Welcome to a world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The universe screamed in protest. Dr. Kalen Vance's research vessel, the Odyssey, was being torn apart molecule by molecule. Alarms shrieked a symphony of his impending death, a counterpoint to the violent shuddering of the bulkhead against his back. The harness, a web of useless faith, dug into his collarbones as G-forces tried to turn his skeleton to jelly. His work, his life's obsession, was being scattered across the cosmos like dust. An energy field, uncharted and impossible, had ambushed them. He was a scientist, not a soldier, but the military survival training hammered into every deep space researcher took over. His mind became a cold, sterile laboratory of calculated action. Pod launch in 5. His voice was a stranger's, calm and detached, even as his instruments reported catastrophic failure across every system. 4. The planet below filled the viewport, a swirl of emerald and sapphire that held no welcome. 3. He sealed his sample case, a frantic prayer that the genetic material within, the last hope for a dozen dying worlds, would survive. 2. The ejection system fired with the force of a planetary collision. 1. Oblivion. The pod didn't crash. It was caught. Like a fly in a spider's web, it was ensnared by the jungle itself. Massive bioluminescent vines wrapped around the hull, cushioning the impact with an eerie, organic gentleness. Silence followed, thick and suffocating, broken only by the frantic thumping of his own heart. Then a new sound. A soft, pervasive hiss like gas escaping. Kalen's head snapped up. The air vents were cycling. The external atmosphere was breathable. Too breathable. He checked the spectro-analysis. Oxygen levels were dangerously high, laced with compounds he'd never seen before. Before he could process the data, a sweet, cloying scent filled the pod thick as honey. His limbs grew heavy. His thoughts, usually a precise torrent of data and hypotheses, became sluggish, wading through molasses. A neurotoxin, subtle, airborne, and terrifyingly efficient. He fumbled for the emergency med kit, for the atropine injector that might give him a fighting chance. His fingers felt like sausages, clumsy and disobedient. The injector slipped, rolling under the console. He tried to move, to crawl, but his muscles refused the command. His body was no longer his own. He was a prisoner in his own skull, watching through a darkening tunnel as his consciousness dissolved. The last thing he saw before the world went black was the escape hatch melting, not with heat, but with a swarm of iridescent, beetle-like organisms that consumed the metal like sugar, their carapaces shimmering in the dim light. They were opening the door for someone. He awoke to the sensation of being touched. Not just touched, but cataloged. He was lying on something cool and smooth, like polished stone. His paralysis remained, a lead blanket over his entire body, but his senses were returning, sharper than before. The air still tasted sweet, but now he could detect undertones of ozone, moss, and something else, something musky and alive. He could hear whispers, a language that flowed like water over chimes, musical and utterly alien. He forced his eyes open. The world was a canvas of green and gold. He was in a vast cavern lit not by fire, but by the walls themselves, which pulsed with a soft internal luminescence. And they were everywhere. Women, hundreds of them. Their skin was a spectrum of deep forest shades, from moss to jade, covered in intricate golden tattoos that weren't ink, but seemed to be living light, pulsing in rhythm with the cavern walls. They wore minimal clothing, strips of what looked like woven leaves and iridescent silks that shifted in color with every movement. And their eyes were the color of ancient amber, fixed on him with an intensity that was part scientific curiosity and part raw, primal hunger. Fingers, long and elegant, traced the lines of his flight suit, testing the strange fabric. One of them, bolder than the rest, pressed her hand against his chest, her head tilting as she felt the steady, terrified rhythm of his heart. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Another woman, her hair a cascade of silver vines, gently tugged at a lock of his own dark hair, rubbing it between her fingers as if it were a rare textile. They weren't being violent. It was something far more unnerving. It was assessment, They were like entomologists studying a new, fascinating, and potentially valuable insect. Then the crowd parted. She moved with a silence that commanded more attention than a shout. She was taller than the others, her presence a tangible force in the room. Her skin was the color of a twilight forest, and her tattoos blazed with a brilliance that cast the others in shadow. From her brow, a pair of elegant crystalline antlers grew, catching the light and refracting it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. This was their queen. Her amber eyes, flecked with chips of emerald, weren't just curious. They were analytical. She didn't look at his body. She looked through it, as if she could see his very DNA. Her gaze fell upon the sample case clutched in his paralyzed hand. With a gesture, one of her attendants gently pried it from his grasp. The queen took it, her fingers tracing the universal biohazard symbol with an understanding that chilled him to the bone. "He is a life weaver," she said. Her voice was like honey and steel, and the word, though alien, resonated in his mind with perfect clarity. A life weaver, a scientist, she knew. She wasn't just a tribal queen. She was something more. The crowd stirred, the whispers growing louder, more urgent. The word life weaver was repeated with a mixture of awe and desperate hope. The queen looked back at him, her analytical gaze softening for a fraction of a second, replaced by a profound, ancient weariness. "Bring him to the cradle," she commanded, "and see that he is made comfortable. Our future may very well depend on him." The paralysis faded slowly, leaving behind a tingling pins and needles sensation and a profound weakness. Kalen found himself in a chamber that defied architecture. It was grown, not built, a seamless dome of living, glowing rock. A pool of steaming, mineral-rich water occupied the center, fed by a waterfall that cascaded down a wall of amethyst crystals. He was alone, stripped of his flight suit and left with a simple, soft tunic. His sample case was gone. He was a specimen in a gilded cage. A short while later, she entered alone. Queen Zelia. Up close, he could see the intricate, shifting patterns of her tattoos, the subtle intelligence in her eyes. "You are Dr. Kalen Vance," she said. It wasn't a question. "Your ship's logs were informative. Though rudimentary, your language has a certain brute efficiency." He pushed himself up, his muscles still feeling disconnected. "Where am I? What is this place?" "You are in Viridia, and you are here because the same cosmic joke that threw you across the galaxy to our doorstep may have also made you our last salvation." She moved to the crystalline waterfall, trailing her fingers through the water. "Our world is dying, Doctor. A genetic plague we call the fading. It started a century ago. First, it made our people sterile. Now it has begun to claim the flora. The very rock of our world is losing its light. We are a people of deep biological symbiosis with our planet. As it fades, so do we." Kalen's scientific mind took over, overriding his fear. "A pathogen? A retrovirus? Something more insidious," Zelia said. "It doesn't kill the cells. It unravels them. It erases the genetic code, turning life back into primordial soup. We have tried everything. Our own life weavers are gone, lost to the fading generations ago. We are warriors, healers, builders, but we have forgotten how to create." She turned to face him, her amber eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "But you are an exobotanist, a geneticist. You came here studying dying worlds. You came here to do the one thing we no longer can." "You need me to find a cure," Kalen stated, the sheer scale of the request settling on him. "I need you to save us," she corrected. "But to do that, you must understand us. You must understand this world, its biology, its very soul. And there is only one way to do that." She spoke of a ritual, a process called the synaptic weave, a deep, telepathic bonding that would allow her to share 100 generations of innate biological knowledge with him directly. It was their way of passing down wisdom, but it was fraught with peril. "The male mind," she explained, a hint of something unreadable in her voice, "is not always resilient enough. The influx of an entire race's consciousness can shatter it." "And if I refuse?" Kalen asked. "Then you will be treated as an honored guest until you die. And we will die with you." Her honesty was more terrifying than any threat. "But," she added, her gaze unwavering, Our high priestess, Kaya, believes in older ways. She believes you are not a savior but a sacrifice, that your life force must be ritually offered to the fading to appease it. She believes tradition, not science, will save us. The choice was clear, a dangerous alliance or a certain ritualistic death. Before any of this, Zelia continued, you must prove you are strong enough to survive the weave. You must undergo the choosing. It wasn't a choice of a mate. It was a series of trials, each designed by a different caste of their society to test his body, his mind, and his spirit. Survive them, Zelia said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, and we will face this together. Fail, and I will give you to Kaya myself. My people's survival is more important than the life of one man, even if he is the last man we will ever see. The first trial was a formality of brutality. The trial of strength. He was brought to an arena of black volcanic rock, surrounded by hundreds of warriors. At the center stood Sira, the same warrior who had first touched his chest. Her body was a masterpiece of coiled muscle, her jade skin gleaming with ceremonial oils. The Skywalker must prove his vessel is not weak, she declared, her voice ringing with confidence. She expected a brawl. Kalen knew he couldn't win that. He was trained, but she was forged in a warrior culture. As she charged, a blur of green and gold, he didn't meet her head-on. He sidestepped, his mind a whirlwind of anatomical charts and kinetic principles. He wasn't a soldier, he was a biologist. He knew how bodies worked. He used her momentum against her, redirecting her charge. He didn't strike at her muscles. He targeted her nerve clusters. A precise jab to the brachial plexus in her shoulder, a calculated sweep targeting the perineal nerve behind her knee. She was stronger, faster, a born fighter, but she was fighting a man. He was fighting a biological machine. He used leverage, timing, and a cold scientific understanding of her own body to keep her off balance. She was enraged, her attacks growing wilder, more powerful. He evaded, weathered the storm, waiting for his moment. It came when she overextended, aiming a powerful kick at his head. He dropped, caught her ankle, and twisted. Not with brute force, but with a precise anatomical lock that sent a shockwave of pain up her leg, forcing her to the ground. He didn't pin her. He simply stood over her, his hand resting on the pressure point at her neck that could render her unconscious. The arena was silent. He had won, not by overpowering her, but by outthinking her. Sira looked up at him, her amber eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a dawning, dangerous respect. He had proven his vessel was not weak, and he had proven his mind was a weapon she hadn't anticipated. The second trial was crueler. The trial of spirit. Kaya herself presided, her presence like a drop in temperature. She led him to a sealed grotto, filled with a species of luminescent orchid. Our ancestors communed with the planet through this flower, the high priestess explained, her voice devoid of warmth. It strips away the self, showing you the truths you hide from. The air was thick with their pollen. Kalen knew he should resist, but it was too late. He breathed it in, and the world dissolved. He was back on Kepler 452b, the colony where he'd been raised. He saw his wife, Alara, her smile as bright as the twin suns. He saw his daughter, Lyra, her laughter echoing in the sterile biolabs. Then the blight came. A terrestrial plague swift and merciless. He saw it on their faces, the creeping grayness, the slow fading of life. He, the brilliant botanist, had been helpless. He had watched his own world die, his own family turn to dust. The orchids showed him every failure, every moment of helplessness, amplifying his grief and guilt into a physical force that threatened to crush his soul. He was drowning in his own past. The loss so profound, it was a physical agony. Just as the darkness was about to consume him, a new presence entered his hallucination. Zelia. She wasn't physically there, but he felt her, a warmth in the cold emptiness. She stood beside him, watching the ghosts of his past. I know this pain, her voice echoed in his mind, not through his ears, but directly in his thoughts, to watch everything you love turn to ash. He saw her memories then. Not as a vision, but as an experience. He felt her centuries of loss, the faces of her people fading, the slow, agonizing death of her world. Her grief was not a sharp, sudden trauma like his. It was a vast, slow-moving glacier, carving canyons of sorrow through her soul. She wasn't trying to save him from his pain. She was sharing its burden. In the heart of his darkest memory, their minds touched, and the synaptic weave began. It wasn't a ritual with words and gestures. It was a spontaneous fusion, born of shared trauma. His scientific knowledge, his understanding of DNA, proteins, and viruses flooded into her. Her innate, symbiotic knowledge of her planet, a wisdom encoded in her very genes, poured into him. He felt the planet's life force as a tangible thing, felt the fading not as a disease, but as a discordant note in a planetary symphony. The process was excruciating, like his very consciousness was being unraveled and rewoven with hers. He saw her deepest fear, not that her people would die, but that they would be forgotten. He saw her most secret desire, not just for a cure, but for a partner, someone to share the impossible weight of her crown. In return, she saw him, not the scientist or the survivor, but the husband and father, a man hollowed out by loss, who filled the void with work because it was the only thing that didn't hurt. When he finally came back to himself, he was gasping on the grotto floor, tears streaming down his face. Zilia was kneeling beside him, her hand on his cheek. Her own eyes were wet. The weave was complete. They were connected, their minds and memories now intrinsically, terrifyingly linked. He not only understood her world's biology, he felt it, and she now understood the cold, hard science needed to save it. He had passed the second trial. He had faced his spirit and survived. But now they both knew that Kaia hadn't intended for him to survive. She had intended for his grief to break him. The final trial was the trial of wisdom. It was not a physical contest or a spiritual ordeal, but a problem to be solved. They took him to the heart of the city, to the Genesis chamber, where the great living matrices that birthed their people were slowly going dark. The fading is accelerating, Thyra, Zilia's young, sharp-minded advisor, explained. The matrices are failing. Show us your wisdom, Life Weaver. Show us a path. Kalen, his mind now a fusion of human science and viridian instinct, approached the dying crystals. Through his bond with Zilia, he could feel the wrongness. The genetic code of the matrices wasn't just degrading, it was being actively rewritten by a biological prion, something that was turning the planet's own life-giving energy into a poison. As he worked, analyzing the data his own senses were now providing, a tremor ran through the chamber. A low, guttural chittering echoed from the tunnels leading to the surface. Alarms, ancient and deep, sang out through the city. "The Blight Crawlers!" a warrior screamed. "They've breached the outer caves!" Creatures of decay, drawn to the accelerated fading, were attacking. Huge insectoid beasts with carapaces of dead rock and mandibles that dripped the very essence of the plague. They were the physical manifestation of the fading. Chaos erupted. Warriors, led by Sira, formed a defensive perimeter around the Genesis chamber. But then a second threat emerged. Kaia and her loyalist priestesses stood before the chamber entrance, their ceremonial staffs held as weapons. "This is a curse," Kaia proclaimed, her voice ringing with fanatical certainty. "His presence has angered the planet. He is the source of this decay. Stop his blasphemy. The old ritual must be performed now." Zilia stood between Kalen and the priestesses, her crystalline blade drawn. "You will not touch him." A battle on two fronts began. Zilia and her royal guard against Kaia's zealots, while Sira and her warriors desperately held back the tide of blight crawlers. It was a race against time. Kalen ignored the chaos, his focus absolute. The prion, the crawlers, the accelerated decay. They were all connected. The prion wasn't a natural mutation. It was a bioweapon, ancient and dormant, now reawakened. But anything that can be written can be rewritten. He needed a counteragent, a new code. He looked at his own hands. His human DNA was alien here, a completely foreign element. It could be the key. He grabbed a shard from a dying matrix, using it as a focusing lens. He needed a catalyst, something to carry the new code. His own blood. "Zilia!" he yelled over the din of battle. "I need your energy! I need the planet's life force, focused through you." Trusting him completely, Zilia broke from her fight. She placed her hands on his back, and through their bond, she channeled the raw, wild energy of her world, her own life force, into him. Kalen cried out as the power surged through him, alien and overwhelming. He used the crystal shard to draw his own blood, letting it drip onto the matrix. He poured all his knowledge, all his will, all his newfound understanding into that single moment. He wasn't just writing code, he was creating a symphony. He wove his human DNA with the Viridian genetic structure, creating a new hybrid code, an antipathogen. The moment the code was complete, the matrix flared with brilliant white light. A wave of pure life energy pulsed out from the chamber. The blight crawlers shrieked as the wave hit them, their decayed bodies dissolving into harmless dust. The dying matrices began to glow again, brighter than before. The very air seemed to sing with renewed vitality. In the sudden silence, everyone stared. Kaya looked at the vibrant, glowing chamber, then at the dust of the creatures, her fanaticism finally breaking, replaced by stunned disbelief. Kalen collapsed, the effort spent. Zilia caught him. He had not only passed the final trial, he had rewritten the future. 6 months later, the world was reborn. The cavern city of Viridia was no longer just green and gold, but a riot of new colors. Hybrid flora, a fusion of Kalen's genetic blueprint and the planet's own, bloomed everywhere. The air was clean, sweet with the scent of new life. The fading was in full retreat, replaced by a wave of vibrant growth. Kalen stood with Zilia on a balcony overlooking the city. He was no longer a prisoner, a specimen, or even an honored guest. He was a partner, a co-ruler. His scientific council worked alongside Thyra's political one, building a new society, one that blended ancient tradition with radical innovation. Kaya, humbled, was now one of their most valuable advisors, her deep knowledge of the old ways essential in guiding their new path. "The first generation is almost here," Zilia said softly. She placed his hand on her abdomen, and through their bond, he could feel it. A tiny, new heartbeat. The first naturally conceived Viridian child in over 100 years. A child of two worlds. "My people call you the first father," she murmured, leaning her head against his shoulder. "They see you as a god." "I'm just a scientist who fell out of the sky," he replied, but there was no real modesty in it. He knew what they had accomplished together. "I came here to study death," he reflected, watching a flock of iridescent, newly evolved birds soar through the cavern. "And instead, I found a reason to live again." She turned in his arms, her amber eyes bright with a love that transcended species, that was forged in shared trauma and reforged in shared triumph. "You were the last hope for my world, but you became its new beginning." Her kiss was a promise of a future he never could have imagined, on a world he had accidentally saved, with a love he had thought forever lost. He was no longer just Dr. Kalen Vance, a man running from his ghosts. He was part of something larger, a new genesis, writing the first chapter of a story that would be told for 1,000 generations to come. I hope you enjoyed this journey into another world. If you want to explore more stories of survival, discovery, and the future of humanity, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And let me know in the comments below. If you had the chance to create a new world, what would be the first thing you'd build? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.